Hello, welcome to Bendigo Decides. I'm Lewis Adams.
I'm Tom O'Callaghan.
And we're here to talk politics.
Mm.
Alright, election creeps closer and closer.
Yeah, only 6 or 7 weeks now till the big day.
And the media coverage has ramped up a bit.
Yeah, it's ramped up. Even in the last week, I've been counting articles in the Bendigo Weekly and Bendigo Advertiser to see what there is. Now, in the last the last week, we've had 18 articles that I've found that quote a politician once or another in state politics. That's compared to the preceding 2 weeks where there were 23 articles. So already we're seeing a huge jump now. Right as we're about to roll into the campaign proper, now that this week that we're speaking now is the very last sitting week of Parliament, and so really it's going to go nuts after this, and we're going to see a lot of campaigning.
And one of the parties has jumped ahead in the poll for most quotes.
Yeah,
I think we'll say.
Well, yeah, for most quotes and most stories, the Liberal parties in the last week, in the last 18 articles, they've had half of them talking about their issues. Not all of them, they haven't had all of them all to themselves. Some of them have been contested issues. Things like Caliana, they made an announcement about Caliana today, which is a contested issue at the moment. Who's going to fund it and how? Various other ones too. TAFE in particular. TAFE's an ongoing battle for both parties. They try and either say that TAFE is broken or TAFE is fine. And in the last 3 weeks, so in counting these 9 articles from this week, there's been a total of 23 articles from the Liberal Party compared to, say, Labor, which has had 9 articles, the Greens, who have had 4, and the Sex parties had 1. Nationals had 3 this week. Damon Drum had a busy week making announcements too.
Saying things.
Yeah, saying things about a history app and about netball and tennis courts, which are going to get done up in Kennington.
I can see the list you've put together, and it does cover a range of issues, as you said. There's things like Caliana, where I believe the big argument is we're going to fund it better.
Well, at the moment, I think the Labor Party has promised $1 million for a plan for how they're going to fix Caliana, because Caliana has some very old infrastructure and very inadequate infrastructure, not just for a school as such, but for a school that delivers services for children who have disabilities or whose needs are greater than your average student. Whereas the Liberal Party, both candidates made an announcement that they've spoken to the Education Minister about maybe getting some funding. They haven't actually gotten funding yet, although that's a deliberate ploy, because one of the things that you get when you speak to Greg Bickley or Michael Langdon is this sense is that they're trying to position themselves as the guys who get the funding within their party. They go and they wheel and deal within the party, and they get funding, government funding, that is. It's a theme not just isolated to this election, but to the last one that Greg Bickley did, and I think also the one before that Michael Langdon did, that they talk about themselves as people who are valuable to know because they can open doors within the party.
So you're saying they're going for that angle where, okay, you might not necessarily trust our party, but we're going to fight whoever it takes to get the money. Get the money for the services that require it.
The interesting thing now is I think with a promise on Caliana from the Liberal Party will be not so much whether or not they'll do one. I think it's now a given because Michael Langdon and Greg Bickley went public about their conversations, but it's now what the nature of that's going to be. And certainly the Liberal Party are trying to talk about it as something more than a plan. Real action, real buildings going up in the next term, rather than, this airy-fairy plan to, plan out how they're going to build this stuff. Whether or not one plan's better or not, that's how they're positioning themselves.
I guess for all we know, like the Liberal Party, it's just too early for them to get into specifics if this is an ongoing conversation they're having.
Well, I guess so. I guess that they want to have some. They'd want to have some kind of idea from this meeting that they've had about some kind of funding, and presumably,
especially within the next month, they want to have something concrete.
It'd be a bit awkward if it turned out that the Education Minister came up and did a whiz-bang announcement for $500,000 funding for 1 or 2 portables or something. So they must have some kind of. Logically, they have to have had something locked in, but what it is yet, we don't know.
What are the other big issues that have caught your eye?
Well, there's been quite a few issues. There was a TAFE forum organised by the Australian Education Union the last week or so, which has got plenty of finger pointing and plenty of people saying TAFE's broken and TAFE's not. Some of the issues going through this list, there's been quite a few government ministers coming up to Bendigo, quite a lot actually, in the last 3 weeks or so, and making announcements while they're here. So that's probably one of the reasons why you're seeing the Liberal Party have more stories in the paper than any other party combined, is because they're bringing up people to make these localised announcements. It seems to be a very strategic kind of plan. So, for example, Wendy Lovell was up here talking about kinder funding, and there's been quite a few stories in the last 3 weeks about funding various kinder centres. The Health Minister was up here basically to have a poke around Bendigo Health and say, yep, okay, and then leaving again, and so that became a story. And they've announced things like a new space for Headspace, a new building, various other things connected with that. In terms of Labor, Labor's really, they haven't had as many ministers up. They did have the Premier up a little while ago, and they've had various senior people. A lot of the stories about Labor at the moment are really ones about federal Labor, because Lisa Chesters has been pushing pretty hard on Anti-Poverty Week and a couple of other issues too, and so she's had Jenny Macklin up, and I think Penny Wong's been up, a whole bunch of people. So not strictly speaking up here to really stump for a candidate in the same way that, say, Christine Milne from the Greens, she came up a little while ago to talk about to talk up the Greens for their state election stuff, which we'll be getting to soon. But really, at the moment, of the 5 stories this week, and in fact of the 9 stories overall for the past 3 weeks, which have been a real Labor thing, they've really focused on trying to take statewide issues and give them a local slant. So, for example, Jacinta Allen's been talking quite a lot about youth unemployment. Now, that's within a wider context of the Labor Party putting out a lot of plans about jobs and jobs figures, employment plans, and various other issues like that. TAFE as well, they've really pushed hard on TAFE, and really that's part of a wider conversation about how you fund the TAFE system rather than just Bendigo TAFE.
But as you mentioned, this is the final week of sitting for the 2 members. Do you think that next week things are just going to explode? We're going to have, like, Jacinta and Maria just going to have all that more time to actually focus on the campaign?
I think so. I think you're going to see more campaign stumping, maybe, the kind of community listening posts and other things that come along with it, which don't get a lot of media, but they're really important. It's more face time in the electorate themselves. I think, too, I wonder whether we're going to start seeing more shadow ministers coming up here to announce policy plans and funding announcements for local things. I wonder whether, though in the past, Labor's tended to focus more on trying to contextualise state-wide issues into local issues, so it's probably going to be a slightly different campaign for them than it is currently for the 2 candidates for the Liberal Party.
Let's get into the Greens.
They've launched the campaigns for 3 of their candidates. Yep. So Jennifer Alden, who's running for Bendigo East, John Brownstein for Bendigo West, and Jenny O'Connor, who is the lead upper house candidate for Northern Victoria, which is where Bendigo sits. Done in Bendigo, Greg Barber, who's the leader of Victorian Greens, and Christine Milne, who's in charge federally, came and did a big event. They travelled around Bendigo, then they went to Harcourt and saw the Mount Alexander fruit gardens and talked about sustainable farming, because Fair Food Week is this week, and so really it was a way of talking about some of the issues that they want to be talked about at a local level concerning food. So they're up at the moment. They're going to start pushing pretty hard. I think They've been in the media a bit around various protests in the last little while. For example, around renewable energy and the federal government pulling back funding or maybe not putting enough money in. There was a protest outside Bridget McKenzie's office, Bridget McKenzie being the local Nationals upper house candidate representative in federal government. And, they've had their campaign launch to coincide with Food Share, the Food Share Week.
I can understand the Greens Party taking a few issues with the federal government's stance on renewable energies and some of the recent federal government policies on the environment.
And on the state government's policies too around renewable energy. The Greens locally are going to push pretty hard for renewable energy to kind of come back to Bendigo. So they're talking about Bendigo and Central Victoria being a hub of green ideas, and maybe having lost that in the last 5 or 10 years, or at least in the 3 or 4, 5, 6 years that we've had Liberal governments kind of ruining everything, I guess. I guess from their perspective. So I guess that they're definitely going to be looking at these local issues, and they're always interested in localism. So food drawn from local areas, energy drawn from local areas, these kind of things.
Well, they do get a lot of support pushing those issues.
Yeah, and particularly in places like Castlemaine and Malden too.
What else is on the agenda for today?
Well, let's talk a bit about this job figure fight that's just come out. Jacinta Allen's been pushing pretty hard on youth unemployment.
And there's been some statistics thrown around, I understand?
Yeah, there were statistics thrown around from the Australian Bureau of Statistics on youth unemployment. Jacinta Allen said that youth unemployment in the Bendigo area was 30.9% for September, quickly followed by the Treasurer, Michael O'Brien, saying, actually, no, that's a misreading of the statistic, which I agree with, actually. I think that it isn't actually true to say that 30.9% of people in Bendigo in September, of young people, were unemployed. When you look at the statistics, really, you're drilling down into a sample base of 50 young people. From Bendigo, so you can't really make any kind of assessment of fall there. I do agree that the unemployment rate is too high for young people. It is far higher than it is for the adult population. Something we need to really push, but I think a fairly generous use of statistics to prove a point when really they could have used the more accurate statistics and still made an important point.
It is true that the actual statistics, the accurate statistics, would have been a strong enough number.
Yeah, well, I think so. I think I've got here, I'm just trying to work out if I've got statistics in front of me for how high they are, but it is high. It is too high, and there's lots of problems for young people getting employment. In an area such as Bendigo where poverty is quite high, poverty is too high in Bendigo. I think I saw something 30 to 40% of people live below a poverty line on week-to-week basis in Bendigo. And that's come out as part of the anti-poverty week that's been taking place, took place last week, I believe.
And that is another thing that, relating back to federal issues, in the federal budget, youth unemployment did take a bit of a hit, and that's something that both the Labor and the Greens can take issue with and start pushing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you'll see that. I think you'll see a lot of these kind of criticisms coming out now in the next little while that do go across that state and federal boundary. The interesting thing from where I sit in terms of Jacinta Allen's comments is how they link in with Labor's pledge to create 100,000 jobs if it wins state election. This is something that happened in the last week or so. They brought out this plan for 100,000 jobs, in many ways by working with employers on payroll tax reliefs in terms of trying to match various costs that employees have taking on new workers with an equal amount of money. So companies that gives jobs to young people will be given $1,000 in tax credit for every worker employed. So, there's quite generous ideas, of course, matched very quickly after that by the Liberal Party, who said, we'll go 200,000 jobs. There's talk at a state level of whether maybe that promise was a bit rushed because Labor have brought out its policy. To which I say, who cares, at the end of the day, whether you rush it or not. It's the plan that's there that's important.
The pre-election season is a hotbed of rushed promises and a lot of people saying things that they're going to be expected to back up if they win the election, but history tells us they don't necessarily have to.
No, and I think that there's an interesting question about trust in these kind of moments in a political cycle, about whether you can really trust people to go through with what they're saying. I think in this case, part of the problem that both parties have is that there's still a little bit light on various details about how they're going to get various bits of this package together. For the Liberal Party itself, its problem is that I think something like 9/11ths of its plan are actually things that's already earmarked in the previous budget. So, there's questions of, well, is this really a new policy or just a continuation of the other policies that they've had? Although, having said that, the budget this year was a pretty big set piece in terms of election making. So, you do wonder just exactly how much of that is, or you do wonder whether it's an important thing that all of it's brand spanking new kind of stuff, or whether it's part of this big continuum.
I don't necessarily think, compared with a lot of other things, that it is that important if it's a new policy or if it's something that they've already earmarked that they were intending on doing, as long as it's something that is something that people want.
Well, in that case, you'll be happy with both policies, Lewis. Both the Labor and Liberal Party, they're both fairly... they're not ones that you could really be outraged about unless you're already already predisposed to being outraged because you support one party or the other.
That does not surprise me at all. There's an election a few weeks, just over a month away, and we've got two major parties and a bunch of minor parties who they're populated by a lot of smart people. They know what not to say, and they're going to be putting their best foot forward. This has been another episode of Bendigo Decides. You can find us on Twitter at The New Local, unless you want to talk specifically to Tom.
At Tom Bendigo.
We will catch up again not too long from now, and we'll try, in the lead up to the election, some regular episodes down just to catch the minute-by-minute updates. But, yeah, thank you for listening.
Yeah, thank you.